من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Today, inshallah, we're going to continue with the body of the khutbah. We spoke last time when we met 2 weeks ago about the first khutbah and how to start it, how to develop the topic and the body of the khutbah. And we're going to continue now in that realm. And the point that we reached is the end of the body of the first khutbah. So you've already outlined your topic and all the nuances and details that you want to present. And now you have to come to a conclusion of that first khutbah. And there are different ways of doing it. You can end with a story. You can end with an ayah of the Quran that kind of delivers your message. You can end with a hadith that delivers your message, or you can simply end by stating your final message. So you express to everybody what it is that you want them to take home from that first khutbah. So that's kind of and you have, don't end it, don't leave it hanging. You know, that's really one of the worst ways to end the first khutbah, where you're just talking about an idea or a concept and then you just stop there and you don't really give them something final to think about as you end that first khutbah. A lot of people do that and it's okay, but it just seems sloppy and it seems that you're unprepared and that you just kind of decided to stop abruptly at some point without really planning how you're going to segment the khutbah. And it's important that you plan ahead of time exactly how you're going to structure it. At the very end, before you sit between the two khutbahs, many people say this statement, أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Basically, you're saying, I say the saying of mine, I seek forgiveness from Allah for me and for you and for the rest of the believers, so ask him forgiveness. He is the forgiving and the merciful. Because the idea behind ending it this way, now this is not a sunnah, this is really more of a habit. But the idea behind this habit is that in the intermission between the first and second khutbah, the expectation is that all of us, the imam and the attendees, are going to make a dua, and traditionally that dua has been to seek the forgiveness of Allah, has been istighfar. And so that's why you tell them, astaghfirullah li wa lakum fastaghfiru, so seek his forgiveness. And you're reminding them that that's really what they should be trying to do in the brief intermission. Now, this ending that I just read to you was the ending reported by the Prophet ﷺ, but it was not reported in his Friday khutbahs. Interestingly enough, we don't have reports of how the Prophet ﷺ ended the first khutbah in the Friday prayer. But this ending was from other speeches that he gave. Some of them were motivational speeches in a battle. Some of them were in difficult economic times where he spoke to the people of Medina, but it wasn't necessarily in the context of the Friday khutbah. But scholars have kind of adapted it as a habit. As I said, it's not really a sunnah, at least not that we know of. There are some other ways of ending the first khutbah. Some people use a very brief statement, أقول ما تسمعون, that's all they say. And the literal translation is that is I said what you just heard, and you end there. Really, you're kind of signaling to the attendees that you're at the end of your first khutbah. Many scholars read this hadith. This is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and they like to end with it. The idea behind this hadith is to remind people to hold themselves accountable, to prepare for what comes after death, and to examine their relationship with Allah. And here's the translation of that hadith. The clever person is the one who subjugates his soul and works for what is after death. and the incapable is the one who follows his desires and merely hopes in Allah. Doesn't have a relationship, but has a lot of hope. So it's again a form of reminder that many people use, particularly in the Arab world. This is a somewhat not mainly in the area of Asham, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine area. They use this quite frequently at the end of the first khutbah. Now, after you finish the first khutbah, you're supposed to sit down, and this is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. You should sit. You should have a pause. It does not have to be long. It's brief. It can be 30 seconds. I mean, a minute, I think, is too long, honestly. During that time, you should quietly make a dua yourself. The dua can be anything, but most commonly, by tradition, it is istighfar, seeking Allah's forgiveness. The attendees should also do the same. The Prophet ﷺ has a very authentic hadith in which he says that during the day of Friday, there is a time when Allah responds to our call and responds to our ask. And many scholars took that to be interpreted as during the Friday prayer, and that this intermission is that moment of time. And so take advantage of it and ask Allah for a dua, whatever comes to your mind. It should be short. Okay, this intermission should not be 2-3 minutes. It really should be fairly short. Now, none of the masajid here in Santa Clarita engage in this practice, but some masajid do their announcements during this time. And I've even been to some where they do fundraising during this time. There is some controversy about whether that is really permissible or not. I mean, I understand the practicality of it, because what they're trying to say is, or thinking, is that they capture people's attention. Everyone's there. They're not going anywhere. Let's take advantage of the fact that they're sitting there. If we do the announcements after the prayer is finished, many people might leave because they have to go to work or this, that, the other thing. But the truth is that this is not a sunnah. This has never really been done until modern times. The Prophet didn't do it. The Khulafa didn't do it. It really, for hundreds of years, Muslims did not engage in this practice. The intermission really is, I feel, after looking at this and reading about it, I don't think this is really permissible. I think they're kind of violating the rules of the Friday prayer. There are others, however, who feel it's permissible and feel it's okay. And so, I think there are different opinions, and anytime there are different opinions, we have leeway. And so there is some leeway depending on which opinion you want to subscribe to. Oftentimes, the Khateeb doesn't have much say in the matter. This is something that is already preset by the administrators in a masjid, and they've already decided how the format's going to be. The Khateeb is just there to give the khutbah, so you have no choice. So even if you don't agree with it, you have to go along with it. You're kind of stuck. But I've been to masajid on the East Coast in Chicago, and they do this a lot. I don't know why it's very popular there. It doesn't seem to be very popular in California. Now, after the intermission, you're going to stand up to give the second khutbah. Now, the second khutbah, you also have to start with a brief statement, an opening statement, similar to what we did in the first khutbah. However, this is much, much shorter. I gave one example here, but again, there are others. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. That's sufficient. All praise be to Allah, and may the blessings and peace be upon the messenger of Allah. And you continue. So just a brief, very brief opening, and then you're going to delve into the second khutbah. Now, the content of the second khutbah actually has quite a few different things you have to accomplish in the second khutbah. It should be short, okay? It should be much shorter than the first khutbah. So it should not be, half and half. It should be more like 90-10, 90% of the time in the first khutbah, 10% in the second khutbah. You could continue the first khutbah. So if you were not able to fit all of your ideas into the first khutbah, you can complete your ideas, if you will, in the second khutbah. However, I think it's better if you utilize the second khutbah to summarize your final message and really kind of give them the take-home idea that you want to bring forward. It also could be a time to communicate an action plan. So if you are calling people to action, let's say you want them to pay their zakah, this would be, the second khutbah would be a good time to give them some practical advice on how to do that. Okay. Point them to a zakah calculator, point them to some charity organizations they can pay their zakah to. If you've already talked to the masjid leadership and they have a zakah committee, or they know people in need, then you can direct them to contact somebody at the masjid to pay their zakah. So it can be used for really a practical call to action after you've already delivered a khutbah with a certain message. It should not, I'm sorry, it says here it should contain, this should be, it should not contain. I forgot to type not. It should not contain new ideas. Okay, you shouldn't start from scratch in the second khutbah. That's a really bad thing to do. You will confuse people. They won't understand why, what you said in the first khutbah, or even why you said it, since you're developing new ideas or concepts. Sometimes you can just end with an impactful story in that second khutbah. Now, aside from the body of the second khutbah, which is what I've talked about so far, after you've completed that body, you have to do a dua. You have to do a supplication, and then you have to do a blessing upon the Prophet ﷺ. And I'm going to talk about both of those in a little bit more detail. Now, one other important thing that many khateebs do in the second khutbah, and I've done this myself sometimes, although I've kind of regretted it, honestly, and I've sort of stopped doing it, is they'll give a khutbah. Let's say it's about prayer, the importance of the prayer. And they talk about that and so forth and so on. But then in the second khutbah, they want to bring attention to a current event. Let's say there's some, racism, or, some issue that is really hot, a political issue that's affecting the Muslims or the Muslim world, and they want to bring that to them. So a lot of people will use the second khutbah to address that current event issue. So they don't want a whole khutbah about the current event, but they do want to offer some Islamic perspective about it, and maybe a call to action, or maybe a final message. I've done that before, and I've kind of, several years ago, I just stopped doing it, because what happens is that people end up focusing on the current event issue, and they forget everything you said in the first khutbah, completely gone. It really diminishes the importance of your own khutbah. So you prepared, you delivered, a khutbah for 30 minutes, and then you just threw it out the window because you came up with a hot topic that people really want to hear about. If you think the topic is that important, you should just make it your khutbah and talk about it, or talk about something related to it, and not just leave it as a hanging thing at the very end. Now, the dua in the second khutbah, you can really make any dua that you wish. The length of that dua depends on how much time you have available. So you can compress it if you don't have that much time, or you can expand it if you have too much time. It's pretty rare that you have too much time on your hand, but if you do, you can make it longer. You can do part of your dua in English, but at least some of, and this is not necessarily a sunnah, but this is a recommendation of the scholars, that at least some of it should be in Arabic. It should be general. It shouldn't focus on a specific issue or a specific person. Because I've seen people do that, where they begin to, they're unhappy with some board member, and they start making a dua against a certain behavior or a certain thing. I mean, it's used as a weapon then. It's not really, that's not the point. The point is to get close to Allah, to ask Allah for something. And in congregation, all of us together. That's really the point. not to try to highlight your own personal grievance that you have with someone or with something. That's quite important. Many times when you are going to give a Friday khutbah, someone will come up to you either before or during the khutbah and will slip you a piece of paper and say, oh, brother so-and-so, his aunt, died in Iraq. Can you make a dua for her? So-and-so's in the hospital. And those, I really don't feel that should be during the khutbah. It's not a practice of the Prophet ﷺ. I don't think it's something we should be doing. I think that should be reserved for after the salah is finished. So after the prayer is finished, then you can make a dua for that person. I think that's a more appropriate time to do that. Now, after the dua is finished, you should read a blessing upon the Prophet ﷺ. And to make it easy, you can read the salawat, which you do in the prayer. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim wa barik. You can just say that. That's sufficient. You could even make it even shorter. You could say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. That's sufficient. Allah have blessings on Muhammad and his relatives. Many imams will read the ayah that I have on the screen. Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala an-nabiy ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. And there's a transliteration there and a translation. Allah and his angels shower blessings upon the Prophet. O you who believe, ask blessings on him and salute him with a worthy salutation. So this is, typically after they read this ayah, they will then say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. So depending on how much time, you can make this quite elaborate or you can make it quite simple. So you have some flexibility on how you do the blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, after you do the dua and the blessings, you now have to end the second khutbah. And really, you're ending the entire khutbah at this point. And there are different ways of doing that. Again, it could be simple or it could be complex. A very traditional way is this statement here, which is an ayah from the Quran. You could say, Ibadallah, O servants of Allah, إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. Allah commands justice and the doing of good and to give to your kin and forbids all shameful deeds, injustice and rebellion, and he instructs you so that you may remember. And then after that, that's the ayah. And then after that, you remind people to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that if they do, then he will remember them. And to be thankful to Allah, if they do, he will give them more. And to seek the forgiveness of Allah, and if they do, he will forgive them. And to have piety to Allah, and he will find them a way out of all difficulties. This is kind of also very traditional, and it's not a sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ did. There are some reports that he used this ending. However, those reports are not authentic. So there's a big question mark on the authenticity of those hadith that tell us that the Prophet used this ending. However, many scholars still felt that it's appropriate to use it if you so wish, but they have not gone as far as saying it's a sunnah, because the narrations are really not authentic. But it has become traditional. Now, it's pretty long, so you may not have time to say all of this. Some people end the second khutbah the same way they ended the first khutbah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله. I said what I'm saying, and I seek Allah's forgiveness. وأقم الصلاة. That's fine too. You can simply do the dua and say أقم الصلاة and just end it there. You don't have to say the statement. أقم الصلاة, of course, is establish the prayer or start the prayer. So you're signaling to the mu'adhin to do the iqamah. There's a lot of controversy about whether we should be saying that or not. I think it's blown way out of proportion. I mean, it's a simple 2 words. It's not like, you're advocating killing someone. I mean, you're saying establish the prayer. It's not the end of the world. But there is a lot of written about this, that whether we should say it or not say it as a khatib, should you actually tell the mu'adhin aqim as-salah, or should you just be quiet and then they know that it's time for them to do the iqamah? I mean, honestly, it's really, when you read it, it just sounds silly. But I mean, I guess somebody spent scholarly time trying to figure this out. And bottom line is there's no conclusion. I mean, you can say it if you want, and some people feel strongly that you shouldn't say it. So there's some controversy about that. I usually say it. I like it because it signals to the attendees that that's over, that we're gonna do now the prayer. They know that you've ended your khutbah. You're not just pausing randomly, and they will begin preparing to do that. Now, once you finished your second khutbah, you now have to start the salah. Now, a couple of things. First, wait for the mu'adhin to finish the iqamah. Okay, you never want to start the salah before the iqamah is finished. I've seen this happen before. I mean, it's really terrible. I mean, the imam is just really excited, and just wants to get things going. Well, you can't do that. You got to wait for the iqamah to finish and then start the salah. Then, after the iqamah finishes, you should first stand facing the attendees. And you should make sure, it's actually your responsibility as the imam to make sure that they're lined up correctly. So if you see that they're not, you should point that out and ask them to correct it. Main issue is that there should be no gaps and that each line should be complete. So you shouldn't have a first line that at the end of the line, there are four spaces still for people to stand. You should tell others to come forward and fill that first line before starting the second line. You should also, or you can, say some encouraging words to people so that they enter a state of attention and humbleness. For example, istawu wa'tadilu, line up in a straight fashion and side by side, and so forth and so on. Many khatibs remind people to turn off their cell phone during this time, or to mute it, so that otherwise you're going to have text message notifications and phone rings happening throughout the khutbah, which is very distracting to people. So remind people, and remember to do that to your own phone. Many times the imam forgets and they're reading and the phone is ringing and it's a mess. Then after that, you face the qibla and you start the salah. You're going to read the Fatiha and the surah and each of the 2 rak'ahs aloud. It's not silent, it has to be aloud. Do not make the 2 rak'ahs too long. This is important. The Prophet ﷺ, whenever he prayed Friday or any other salah in congregation, he never made it long, because he always was concerned that there may be children who are crying, or who, children can't tolerate to stand for a very long time, and so they make their mothers nervous. And he, out of compassion and mercy for the mothers, didn't make it too long, because he didn't want them to become anxious about their children. So he traditionally made them short. And you should do the same. We may not have crying children, in the masjid, but there are people who have to get to work. They're on a deadline. They have very limited time. They got to drive, especially here in California. I mean, there's nothing that's 2 minutes away. Everything, even in Santa Clarita, getting from one side of Santa Clarita to another now takes half an hour. I mean, it's just, you need to give people that time so that they can get out and go to work or school or whatever it is that they need to attend to. Now, after you finish the salah, you will get some feedback, okay? Not always. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. Many people will often give you positive feedback. Something you said resonated with them, they found it useful or informative, and they will tell you that. And that's very kind of them. Some people will give you suggestions for improving your khutbah. I think you should listen to those people very carefully and really register in your mind what they're saying, because many of them have very good suggestions and really, good ideas that you could incorporate if you discuss that topic again in the future in another khutbah. So keep track of them. I really do. I take this seriously. I mean, when I get to my car, I'll write down some of the suggestions that I heard, so that next time if I have to give this khutbah, I remember to incorporate the suggestions. Sometimes people will correct inaccuracies that you stated during the khutbah. We're all human. We all make mistakes. We may have narrated a hadith incorrectly. We may have read the ayah incorrectly, whatever it may be, and they'll correct you, and that's good. I mean, just note that and be careful on that issue next time. There are some people who will become very angry, and they'll be very upset with something you said or an idea you mentioned, sometimes in passing. It's not the main idea, but boy, they can get upset. I mean, and I've had this happen to me frequently, and I understand the passion. I don't think the methodology is befitting of a Muslim, but people vary in their understanding of how to behave as believers, and that's fine. But some people will become very, very angry and very passionate about something you said. You do have to have a thick skin, okay? You can't take this personally. You can't get upset. Don't get into a fighting match. It's really, really unbefitting of a khatib to do that. That's not what you should do. You should smile, you should thank them, and move on. If they're legitimate, and many times there is a legitimate basis to what they're angry about, register the actual idea. One thing you want to avoid is to dismiss them just because they're angry or just because they're yelling at you. That's not really the right thing to do. They may actually have a valid point, and so register their point and just move on. Okay, don't engage in a back and forth discussion with an angry person. You will always lose. You're never going to win that discussion. And honestly, you're never going to teach them either. They're so blinded by their anger that they're not going to really have an open mind to listen to what you want to say, or what your opinion is, or your interpretation is of a particular event or idea or ayah or hadith. And so, don't take it personally. Don't let it upset you. When I started, it used to upset me a lot, I'll have to admit, because, I would have put all this time in. I'll be honest with you, right now, it doesn't take me very long to prepare a khutbah. I can do it pretty quickly. But, when I started out, I would spend a whole week preparing khutbah. I mean, really, delving into it, learning, reading, and then someone would come and get angry at me, and they don't even know anything about I can tell by their discussion, their reason for being angry, that they have no idea what they're talking about, that they did not study the matter, nothing. They're just being, angry people. And it used to really upset me. I didn't get into a fighting match, but it would ruin my entire day. I would just feel like, why do people do that, But I guess as I got older, it doesn't faze me anymore, honestly. I just say, I ask Allah to teach them, and to show them the right way. I don't take it personally. I do sometimes, if I think they're blatantly wrong, like they're spreading total misinformation, I might correct what they say and gently kind of alert them that this is a dangerous thing, or not a good thing that you're advocating. I mean, I'll give you an example, okay, just so that you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. One time I was at a masjid. It wasn't in Santa Clarita. I was invited to give a khutbah at a masjid I'd never been to before. And I went, I'm not going to say where it is, but I went to this masjid, and I gave a khutbah the khutbah was about how the Muslims should be forgiving. So, if your neighbor, does something to you that you don't like, don't get upset, don't sue them, don't start, even if they're non-Muslim. That's not who we are. We don't, we're not people who always want to fight. Okay, shouldn't be who we are. And I was quoting from the Quran and the Hadith and many examples from the life of the Prophet ﷺ about how the Muslim should be someone who forgives, someone who lets go, someone who actually tries to mend and reconcile between people, not someone who tries to inflame hatred and animosity. And I went on and on about this. And I thought I had a pretty strong argument. I mean, I didn't make anything up. I mean, I brought it from the Quran, many ayats from the Quran. I brought many ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ and examples from his life of how he even treated his own enemies, people who wanted to kill him, how he actually dealt with them with kindness and compassion and was able to win many of them, almost all of them, over to his side and to his point of view. And, I didn't think there was anything controversial about that, honestly. I mean, I thought, or in my mind, I didn't even think about it, honestly. I just assumed, and maybe that was the wrong thing to do, that most Muslims would agree with that that's really who we are and what we should be. I mean, after all, that's what the Quran says, and that's what the Hadith says. And I finished, and I did the prayer, and then many people came up, and they were very happy. They gave me very positive feedback. They said, oh, great khutbah, we really needed that, blah, blah, blah. And they were very happy with it. And then one guy waited for everyone who came and, shook my hand and this and that, and was giving me feedback. And he waited till the end. He was, I don't know, probably 18, 19 years old. And he came up to me and he ripped me apart. He said, Imam, how could you say this? This is irresponsible. You are, you're teaching us to be like the Christians. We turn we get slapped on one side of our face, we turn the other side of the face. The people are trying to kill us. People are trying to harm us. People are, engaging in Islamophobia, and you're telling us to be kind and to forgive them. And he went on and on and on and on. And he was really, really, really upset. I mean, his face was red. He was yelling at me. I mean, he thought I did like the worst thing in the world. And, who would have thought that, right? I mean, I had a very peaceful tone. I wasn't, and somehow that was the wrong thing. Somehow that was, a mistake and in his mind. And he said, no, what you should be telling people is don't let anyone, attack you. Don't let anyone insult you. If they insult you once, insult them 10 times. And he just had all these magical ideas, kind of the fervor of the youth. And I thought his ideas were pretty toxic. I actually thought they were destructive. They clearly were not Islamic. I mean, there was no question about it. I mean, he said, if someone tells me one thing, I'm going to hit back 10 times as hard. I said, I let him calm down. I let him finish. It took about 10 minutes of nonstop yelling at me. And finally, when he finished, he kind of paused and he waited for me to respond. And I just, I said, I actually shook his hand and I said, I understand, I understand your point of view. And I'm not advocating that we give up our rights. I'm not advocating that we not fight for justice. None of that. What I'm talking about is on a personal level, we should be kind, we should be compassionate, we should be forgiving. And this idea of if someone insults me once, I'm going to insult them 10 times, I said, that's a direct violation of the Quran. And I told him the story of the Prophet ﷺ. I said, when Hamza was killed in the Battle of Uhud, Hamza was the uncle of Rasulullah ﷺ. He was his protector. And he was killed, but he wasn't only killed. They cut his belly open and they took out his liver and they chewed it, just as a disgusting way of kind of hurting the Prophet ﷺ and hurting his feelings. That's what they did. When the Prophet ﷺ saw that, he said, this is in Arabic, this is called tamthil. When you open up a dead body and you destroy its organs after it's dead. It was a way which, when Arab tribes had their wars, that was the way of like adding insult to injury, to really kind of shame the other group that, not only did we kill, your leader, we actually opened up and took his organs out. I mean, we really destroyed it. So it was kind of a statement of power. So when the Prophet ﷺ saw that happening to Hamza, he emotionally got overcome by that. I mean, how could they do this to his uncle? He loved his uncle. his uncle who believed in him and who was protecting him, and who fought in the war to protect Islam and to protect. How could they do this? So he said, by Allah, in the next battle, we're going to do the same to 100 of them. That's what the Prophet said. He was so upset. He said, in the next battle, we are going to do the same thing. We're going to cut them open and take to 100 of the non-believers. That's what he said. And immediately Allah revealed Quran. A lot of people that may not know the story. You may be hearing it for the first time. But Allah revealed Quran to correct the Prophet ﷺ. And a lot of people say that this ayah and the ayah of Abasa wa Tawalla are proof of the humanity of the Prophet ﷺ, that he was not divine. And Allah said in the Quran, وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ. And if you punish, you have to punish in an equal manner by which you were punished. Don't be excessive in your response. It has to be the same, it has to be equal. And then he also said, and if you forgive, that's even better. SubhanAllah. So when I told this young man that story and the ayah, he really had nothing to say. He was actually quite embarrassed. He said, I didn't know this. I said, it's okay. I understand your passion, but relax. Okay, it's okay. That's not who we are. It's more important to be a good Muslim, to be close to Allah, to follow what Allah says in the Quran. That's what we are here to do. And so this, this idea of angry people can be disturbing, but it also can be sometimes a way to impart knowledge to others who are lacking in that knowledge. You have to remember, in the end, you can't possibly please everybody. Okay, that's just a given. Okay, anytime you give a speech, I don't care if it's a khutbah or a speech at work or a speech at school or wherever you are, you're not going to please everybody. There are going to be people who think that you're an idiot, that you have no idea what you're talking about, that they can do better. And that's fine. I mean, you're not going to please everybody. You just have to accept that and move on, and don't get hung up on why do these people hate me? That's not the issue. Okay, that's just the reality of public speaking. You have to have thick skin, and you have to understand that there are going to be people out there who are not going to agree with what you say and are going to be quite passionate about showing you that they don't agree or telling you that they don't agree. So this brings me to the end of what I have prepared for today. And really, by this completion, we've now discussed actually how to give the khutbah, the entire khutbah. The next few sessions, maybe next 2 sessions, are going to be about how to speak publicly. Okay, so pointers about how to deliver the khutbah. So this was how to organize your khutbah, how to, what to say, what the sunnah is, what are some of the traditions. But now some pointers. The next Friday, inshallah, we'll meet and we'll talk about how to actually give a speech and how to give a good speech. There's a big difference. There are people who are excellent speakers, and there are people who are horrible speakers. And we're going to discuss some of that. We're going to discuss what makes the good speakers good and what makes the bad speakers bad. And I'm sure all of you have heard and listened to speech. It doesn't have to be in the context of a khutbah, any speech. I've heard good and bad speakers. And all of you have kind of an immediate reaction. You know. I mean, you may not be an expert at public speaking, but when you hear a speech, you know when one is good and you know when it's bad. People are very in tune to that. And so we will go over pointers. And don't think that people are just born good speakers. I mean, there are some people who are exceptional, they're really good at speaking. But most good speakers are not born as good speakers. They're trained as good speakers. These are people who learn how to speak and who practice endlessly. It's almost like driving a car. Okay, I mean, when you start out, you just don't know how to drive. Little things are a big deal. Changing a lane is scary. But then after you've driven for, a few months, you become pretty good at it. And after you've driven for a year or two, it's completely second nature. You don't even think about it. and you still do a good job at it. Otherwise, you'd be crashing every day. So, giving a public speech is the same way. It involves a lot of practice and a lot of corrections to your own self. I actually think it's one of the few things where you actually become self-conscious. I mean, many of us, we think we're great, right? But once you stand up and speak, you realize that you're not that great. And you realize that, wait a second, I can improve. I can be better at doing something. And you could take that to the rest of your life. If you always think, well, I can be better at my job, I can be better at my reading, I can be better, you can always improve. And the same is true for public speaking. It really is an exercise in self-reflection, but we'll talk more about that next Friday and the Friday after that. I think it really requires 2 sessions to discuss how to deliver a good khutbah and what things make a khutbah horrible. You could have prepared the most in-depth research. You could be the most knowledgeable person on the topic. You could be a scholar on the topic. But if you deliver it in a way that people don't resonate with, it will be horrible. You will not have delivered the message. So delivery is important. Delivery is really key. If your delivery is bad, it doesn't matter how much research you spent. Nobody's going to learn from that. And that's a key issue. So I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions about what we've discussed so far.